Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sophia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then the Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us.
So first of all, I would like to have an opportunity to welcome you all here today. This is very exciting. John, I know, welcomed you all on both of our behalf, but this is very fun for me. There are so many familiar faces, some from old friends, which is really great, and some from kind of more recent LifeCraft days, and really excited to see a lot of the new faces. So welcome to everyone who's here. I'm very excited to be here with you today. It's a funny thing, when John and I prepare LifeCraft Day, and actually this is actually the way our podcasts happen too, we do not review one another's talks. So anyway, it's always kind of interesting for me. I was speaking to someone at the back and they said, yeah, I was watching you and you look like you were listening really intently. I was wondering, doesn't she know what he's about to say? And the answer is no, I have no idea what he's about to say. And it was interesting. I'm listening and I go, oh great, I'm saying that too. Good, check, okay, it's safe. And then I'm like, wait a minute, you're stealing my thunder. That's what I'm talking about. So anyway, I found that talk really inspiring. Thank you, dear. I found myself sitting there going, let's do that. Oh, we have been doing that. Oh, okay. So, but that is to say that I think it's really great to hear these things again, because, I mean, certainly John and I have been talking about these things our entire married life, and yet I'm humbled and slightly humiliated that I felt like, wow, I want to do that, you know, and I think that that's the normal human condition, that we need to hear it again and again. And maybe when we hear it a second or third or fourth time, it's not that it's completely new, but we get to understand a different facet of this thing that we're encountering. And it's just such a delight that the Lord is so super abundantly generous that he gives us things in many facets. So life is an ongoing discovery of the same beautiful thing over and over again. So thank you very much, dear. That was very inspiring. I want to share with you that actually John has been wanting to speak on this topic of reclaiming husbandry and wifery for a long time. And after hearing his presentation this morning, I understand why he was eager to do that. And I'm the one who has put the brakes on that every time he said, well, let's do husbandry and wifery. And part of the reason I put the brakes on it was, first of all, just to confess very frankly, I really don't like that word, wifery. Like, there's something about the word wifery that's just a little aesthetically. But it's not just kind of aesthetically a word that's not very pleasing to me. I realize that it has a lot of connotations attached to it that have made it be meh, or that's being very gentle. Actually, kind of offensive and a little bit hard to hear. And I realized that was part of my concern in bringing up this topic. There's so much negative energy around the word wifery that I think husbandry doesn't really have. So husbandry has two meanings. Its primary meaning that John was talking about today, and then it's come to mean a way of taking care of the land. John, in his, actually in preparation for this, went and read one of John's blog posts, which I don't do very often, but his post on husbandry, and he said that he looked up the word husbandry in encyclopedia online, and it said, I just actually have to look at this and read it to you because I could not believe that this was the definition of husbandry. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it quickly. Basically, it said, it really doesn't have anything to do with being married at all. It really just has to do about taking care of the land. So there's actually an intentional excising of that primary meaning of the word husbandry. But conveniently for husbandry, there's this secondary term that makes it more palatable in the modern age. It's not that way for wifery. So really, there is no secondary meaning for wifery that saves it and keeps it in the modern language. And I think that's why there's this incredibly strong agenda to actually excise the word wifery. There's a lot of negative energy around it. And so when you begin to speak of the arts of wifery or being a homemaker, people are hearing what their expectations lead them to hear. So it's very hard to have a conversation about it. So So that was part of the reason I was unwilling to have a conversation about Wifery, talk about reclaiming Wifery. I was frankly also afraid of the backlash of kind of vituperate anger of women who are so against the notion of Wifery and promoting that as a good for women. So there was a little bit of a fear factor. And finally, the last reason is my experience of being a homemaker and a wife has been a great one. And it's clearly something that is very enriching and undoubtedly producing something of infinite value. Now, my children are a little older, and so I'm actually getting some feedback from them, and it's just really a gift to get to that point in your parenting where your children come back and say, oh, do you remember how, thank you so much, or those were the best times. It really helps cast life backwards. But I will admit that my experience it has been very, very difficult. And in a world especially where there is no support for Wifery, we live actually in a community where I think the life of the woman in the home is farther removed from the greater societal world than it's ever been in any other generation. What we do in the home is so different from the ambition of the world and the function of the world outside that there's not a lot of understanding for what we do. And so you feel a lot alone. I don't know if women in the room can agree with that, but I feel like there's a factor of isolation that we experience in being housewives. Also, the society that we live in doesn't really help us raise our children. And so I think women of the modern era are responsible for and doing far more than women of any other generation have been asked to do. So there are many things that society helped us with or did for us or with us, and we don't really have that aid. And so I think the reality is that women who stay at home to take care of their children, I'm not even talking adding the layer of homeschooling. Like, let's just even leave that aside. That's a whole separate issue. We're doing more than people have ever done in the past, and it's very exhausting. And so it's hard for me to get up and say, yes, young ladies, you should do this. It's so great. It's so fulfilling. You will be completely worn out long before the end, but go for it anyway. So what changed my mind? I'm the one who woke up not that long ago and said to John, you know what? I think we need to do it on Wifery. And John said, wow, that's great. When's the change? And I just realized, I woke up one morning and I was thinking about it, and I had this feeling of, frankly, resentment that the conversation around Wifery and the arts of Wifery are pretty much determined by the secular liberal world around us. And I, as a woman and a homemaker, feel robbed. And I feel, I don't want to say angry, but I feel indignant that I have been robbed of the dignity of the work that I do. And actually that the rhetoric around me has kind of made me look at what I do in a way that is not bolstering, it's not ennobling. And so I thought, you know what, I think we need to do this, because I want to stand up and say why what I do is, in fact, not just of infinite value to my children, but for me, that I become fulfilled in a way that is unique and can never really happen in a different circumstance when I fully engage in the life of the home. So I think what John's presentation, I was listening to it the whole time and going, wow, you could say the exact same thing about Wifery that you say about husbandry. It's the feminine way of engaging in the work of the household. And a lot of those things are really identical. There are different ways in which we do that. But so I just really, the whole time that I'm talking, just keep in mind everything John was saying, because it's really exactly what I'm trying to say. So I'm sorry, I have to look at my notes because I'm not as experienced as John at lecturing. But so just to make sure I don't wander too much. Okay, so one of the things that I think it's important for us to understand why Wifery is a difficult thing to talk about, because it will help us kind of orient ourselves. What is it that we're seeking to reclaim, and why is that important for us, okay? So let me just go back. I want to say another reason that I felt that I really wanted to reclaim this word and the concept of Wifery is that I also, in addition to feeling like it casts a light on what I do in a way that is negative, I think it's actually also in many ways muzzled mothers or tied our hands from being able to pass on the arts of Wifery to our daughters. So the rhetoric that surrounds that is you're teaching your daughter to be a drudge, you're preparing her for slavery. And so I think that in a lot of ways we've been a little bit intimidated to prioritize higher education, which I think is extremely important for women, actually critical because of her role in the home. And I totally support education, but for different reasons than the secular world really underscores that. They underscore it for the purpose of outcomes and a certain role in the outer world that actually does not have to do with relationships to the people that you're closest to. I think education is extremely important for women precisely because of her role of relationship within the household. But I feel like I'm saddened for the young women who are growing into women who will embrace a life in the home, and even those who do not get married. The reality is that for a woman, the making of a home is something that is always with her, whether she is married and raising a family, or whether she's alone, or whether she's in a religious community. This Wifery is different from husbandry in this regards. John gave you a list of many things that you can choose from them to incorporate into your life. Wifery is different. My list isn't going to be here are a few things you can choose to do. We're kind of given the tasks in our home, right? So I'm going to talk about things that are not, you don't have a choice about these things. You know, you do have to do dishes, you do have to vacuum, you do have to set the table, you do have to cook. So Wifery is a little bit different in that regard. And I really think that I would like to reclaim the ability to be able to teach our daughters skills in the exercise of those arts so that when they start their life, they're not floundering, and ultimately that kind of lack of skill makes the relationship that is supposed to be the heart of the family much more difficult to attain. So that is an important reason to reclaim it. Okay, so, this is, I found here. In John's post, the definition on vocabulary.com of husbandry is, I don't know if anybody else read this post, I think it's great. It says, husbandry has nothing to do with being a husband and a lot to do with being a farmer. I'm sorry, that even just sounds like an ignorant definition. Anyway, but it really betrays how society thinks about husbandry, and by extension, Wifery is the same. Now, I would like to, John on his handout sheet has Wendell Berry's quote about what husbandry is, but I specifically used it in my talk because I think that this can be very well and beautifully applied to what Wifery is. So John quotes Wendell Berry in his post. He says, husbandry is the name of a connection. It is the name of the work of the domestic man who has accepted a bondage to the household. I don't know what number that is on your handout from John, but it's on there. Okay, so I'm going to read that again. I think that is a really outstanding definition of husbandry, and I'm going to apply that to Wifery. Husbandry is the name of a connection. It is the name of the work of the domestic man who has accepted a bondage to the household. There are a couple of really important words there I want to underscore because they are a little bit shocking and they are not very palatable to people in our society. So first of all, connection. Husbandry is the name of a connection. That's not a shocking word. Connection is what everybody is looking for. But he defines husbandry by the concept connection. Then he says it's the name of the work of the domestic man. No, domestic. That is not a nice word in the world we live in right now. I think it's very courageous to use that word in the description as an adjective for a man. I think that's marvelous and it's challenging, and that's exactly what John was talking about in his talk earlier. The domestic man, this is something good that we're striving for, and actually is a very rare creature in the advertisement of the world, who has accepted a bondage to the household. Okay, that's the worst, the word bondage. That's the most unacceptable word in this entire definition. We don't like that word bondage. It sounds very, very negative. And I think it challenges us to actually see what is the meaning of this word bondage, and how is it actually something that gives great dynamic value to this understanding of what it means to be a husband. It means the intentional and willed connection of yourself to someone else in a way that is permanent and binding restrictive to you. You are accepting the restrictions that come with binding yourself to another person. That is an incredibly beautiful notion. I think this definition of husbandry can use perfectly for wifery. Let's just change the word wifery for husbandry. Wifery is the name of a connection. It is the name of the work of the domestic woman who has accepted the bondage to the household. Okay, that's like even worse because you don't put woman in bondage in the same, domestic woman in bondage. Wow, that's it, okay. But it has the same beauty as the description of a man who has, by his intention, through an invitation, willfully tied himself to a woman and invited her to the work of the household. This is actually an incredibly beautiful notion that you can be connected by a bond that's inseparable to someone who has given themselves to you unequivocally, permanently, and for your flourishing. That's how we understand this definition of Wendell Berry. It's an incredible notion that that's a bond that's not broken. So it's in the light of that definition of Wendell Berry that I would like to look at Wifery, and I think actually it provides something of an answer to the problem that the modern world has in embracing the notion of Wifery, a woman in bondage. This is in the bondage of love and self-sacrifice for her flourishing and the flourishing of the household. I think this is particularly difficult for the modern world because the modern world abhors the notion of bondage. It abhors it because it lives according to a gospel of self and radical autonomy. These are two things that are valued in the world above all else: to have total autonomy over one's own life. I can do whatever I want. What's good for me? I'm doing what's good for me. It sounds like very good self-care. It's a radical notion of autonomy that disassociates you from everyone, not just from the society that we live in, but all the members of the society, and you go to a smaller and smaller circle, even within the home and the family, and most dramatically and drastically from the person you're supposed to have the closest bond to, your spouse. People aren't even getting married. And when they do, they're maintaining their autonomy. This is a very, it drives really a tremendous crisis in the world that we're in today. People feel radically alone. They feel incapable of making connections with other people in their environment. And this comes from this drastic notion of autonomy. I think it's also very much exacerbated by the use of virtual technology, because virtual technology encourages and enhances the lie that it is possible for us to live on our own. We actually spend much of the time doing the things that we do by ourselves through the agency of this technology, so we don't even have to be with people. And then in particular, social media, which drives those who use it into a solipsistic self-absorption. That's just kind of the ethos of social media. It's about me. It's about the way people perceive me. And so all of these things, I know we talk about social media and how damaging it is, but what's really dramatic, we realize that all of these negative tendencies are actually ones to create isolation. Isolation, isolation, isolation. The discussion we're having today about husbandry and wifery is precisely the cure for this dramatic experience of isolation. This is not an academic issue. People are suffering in the world around us from feeling deeply and profoundly isolated. So it's not just, I'd like to reclaim wifery so I feel better about what I do. I'd like to reclaim wifery for all of the women who desire and seek greater connection in the world that they live in, first in their families, in their marriage, in their children, in the physical home that they live in. It's not just people, as John said, we take care of things for the sake of the people. But the things are really important, and they become part of our experience of being connected. It's very important. This notion of wifery and husbandry as being primarily a place of connection is a way to reclaim that connection in the world that we live in. So I believe that this notion, the reason it's very difficult to talk about Wifery in the modern world is because the notion of relationship has been taken out. So people don't talk about that in Wifery, but the telling definition in the dictionary that John quoted in his post about has nothing to do with husbandry. It has to do with taking care of the land. What they've taken out of the primary notion of husbandry is relationship. The same thing has been done for Wifery. And I think that that's part of the reason that we can't have a conversation about the arts of Wifery in a way that is positive and productive. Because standing alone, the work of Wifery, in fact, does become a drudgery. If it's taken out of the context of relationship and a work that is done out of love and service for the people who are given to you that you have a connection to. I mean, I cannot state that enough. The work that a woman does in the home is very difficult. It's physically demanding. It's mentally demanding. In itself, it's not very intellectually stimulating. The works that are demanded of us day in and day out. If we simply experience them as a task that is separated from the connection of the people who are given to us in the home, they surely become a drudgery. This is what women in the contemporary world are reacting to. When they say, are you going to tell me I have to live in a house and wash people's socks and keep washing dishes and cook? Yeah, that sounds horrible. They've taken out the people. They've taken out the connection, and all they see is the task. This is actually an incredibly important thing, and it transforms everything. This is where I was like, John, you're stealing my thunder, but maybe I should say, Aristotle, you're stealing my thunder. Thank you. John said, Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas says that the ideal unifies, I didn't write it on my notes, it's in my phone, which I've gotten rid of like a good girl, but it unifies our acts. The ideal unifies the activities that we do. The ideal in Wifery and husbandry is the bond of service and love between the spouses and the children and everyone else who is included in the household. This is the ideal that unifies and gives meaning to all of the work that is done within the household. And it actually transforms the very, very difficult of the housework and the work that's done in a home in a really extraordinary way. So there are several ways that we can go about this discussion about Wifery now that we've kind of established that the key we have to keep in our direct vision. It's about the people we are connected to. It's not about the things we do. It's about the people we need to keep that in mind as we discuss the practical details. I do want to talk about the practical details because that's part of reclaiming Wifery is the arts, the work that we do. We can go about this discussion about Wifery in a couple of different ways. There's a wonderful book that I've recommended that's called A Sixpence in Her Shoe. It was on the New York Times bestseller list in 1970 of all things, by a woman named Phyllis McGinley, who is writing in defense of the womanly arts of keeping a household. She was a very famous, well-known, well-read poet and writer and journalist at that time, so very respected as an academic and an intellectual. And so she writes this book that goes on the New York Times bestseller list saying that the womanly profession, of housekeeping is the oldest, most ancient, and honored and time-honored profession. And so then she continues to make the argument and underscore how it's a badge of honor for a woman to say she's a housewife. And the rest of the book is a delightful description of how a woman engages in her household. It's called A Sixpence in Her Shoe, and it refers to an Irish, I don't know if it's a proverb, that if a woman is a good housekeeper, the little people leave a sixpence in her shoe. So it's the sign that she's a good housekeeper. So she titles her book A Sixpence in Her Shoe. And so there are a lot of different ways that we could approach Wifery by building ourselves up and talking about what great dignity the work has. But I don't really want to do that. I actually want to talk about the specific works and a particular way of approaching the work because it has to do with the experience that I shared with you of my being overwhelmed in the tasks of homemaking. So John has been talking about these ideals and bringing them to our home all the time. We talk about them all the time. And then as I look back, I realized I would then turn around and get to the business of homemaking. And I realized that I, over the years, have felt extremely tired out and worn out by the experience. And so I'm always trying to go, what can I do? What's different? Can I get this book on organization? Maybe if I do the Marie Kondo Japanese way of tidying, et cetera. So like literally I have tried it all, and I'm still worn out and tired by housekeeping. And I want to share with you something that sounds like I'm just sharing another tool, but the reason I was excited about this when I discovered it is that it's actually a very direct overlap to many of the things that John was saying today in his lecture from a philosophical perspective, but actually from a cognitive behavioral perspective. I personally love it. My favorite things that I did in college was when I read a text in one class and then read the same text in a different discipline and looked at it from a complete different perspective and said, wow, these things overlap. So that's my favorite experience. What John was sharing with you today are philosophical principles about what it means to be human and how we're designed. And I actually have discovered that what John is talking about and these ideals, having the ideal unify the details, I actually discovered this recently in a work by cognitive behavioral therapist named Kevin Majors. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of optimal work. And it was actually extremely helpful for me because basically what Dr. Majors says is that when we experience stress, read Housekeeping, dishes, raising children, teenagers, when we experience stress, very often the stress shuts us down. He's talking about cognitive behavior. He's talking about how your brain works, what your brain needs in order to function properly. John is talking about his principles, what man needs to be able to function properly. Dr. Majors says that your brain, when it encounters the stress of a task, what it actually needs to be able to satisfy and solve the task in a way that makes you grow is to actually reframe it. And what he means by reframing is widening the context, seeing the bigger context for the stress that you are experiencing at the moment. That is exactly what John was recommending that we do as regards husbandry in the home. We have to see the wider context that our life in the home is a service of love and connection to those who have been given to us. All of it. Now, interestingly, from a cognitive behavioral perspective, he says when we experience stress and we act through that stress, our brain is most plastic. It actually helps us to retain a behavioral pattern in our brain. Who asked the question about virtue? So when you ask the question about virtue, Dr. Majors actually says when you are in stress, it's very important that you resolve the stress by widening the context and acting in your best self, because you're actually imprinting a pattern which makes it easier to make a habit. And that's what virtue is. It's making a habit. So I was delighted to discover, in a completely different avenue from what John and I have been talking about, there's a way of encountering and engaging the stresses of the tasks in your life that actually makes you a better person, and that's by widening the context. Remembering on a daily basis why we are doing the things that we are doing, which is exactly what John was describing today earlier in his talk earlier. Dr. Majors says that in order for your brain to develop pathways that respond that way habitually, we need to do this on a regular basis intentionally. So it's not good enough to be married to a philosopher who gives you all these great ideas about why what you're doing is so wonderful, and then not thinking about it again until we talk about it next time. What Dr. Majors is recommending is that we actually make a practiced daily habit of encountering the stresses of the work that is in our life by seeing the bigger context of love and service. And interestingly, actually, he says that is the highest context that provides the greatest possible solutions to the practical difficulties the brain encounters: service and love. So he's talking about from a cognitive behavioral perspective. I just find that so exciting, that what we are hearing about healthy human behavior from a philosophical perspective, what we are hearing about healthy development of virtue, is actually corroborated by science in the way the brain functions. The brain actually likes it when we live that way, and it helps us to actually live that way more consistently and better. So I was delighted to discover that this very thing that is the answer to Wifery is actually the answer to overwhelmed for women in the household. It's also the only way that I'm willing to talk about in detail in this context about the work in the household. Because I think often what happens when people try to reclaim the work of the household, they talk about the works and they become isolated from the bigger context, which is service. And then it's heard wrong and it's interpreted wrong and it doesn't support us in the work that we do. So I want to now go ahead and having widened that context and remind us that we are always talking about developing arts of living in a household that actually strengthen the connections with people in our household through service and love. Now we can fruitfully talk about actually the works in the household. So John said a phrase that was actually really deliciously poetic. And I was like, tell me more. In his talk this morning, he said, there's a deep magic in the work of the household. Ooh, I love that. There's a deep magic. I think we just all love Aslan so much. Anytime you say that, it sounds great. But actually, I would say there's a deep magic in the work of the household only if you can retain that larger context. And so that's our challenge. We're going to retain that larger context and see some of the tasks of the household always in that light. Okay, so I've divided into several subsets of the primary works that are in the household. There are others. Before we go on, I want to say to everyone, please, nothing is absolute here. Please do not take anything as an absolute. We're always in flux, and we're always working in a very real, practical context. Real time demands a lot of variations. And so, as John said about technology, we're going to exercise our prudence in knowing how these things apply to our household. So housekeeping, that's the number one thing. I have to confess that I have always lived by the mantra, decorate first, clean later. So full disclosure, that when this woman is talking to you about housekeeping, you might want to take it with a grain of salt. Or maybe this is a person who's actually going to be helpful because she knows what it's like to be drowning under it. Okay, so now after doing it, trying to decorate first and clean later for many years, I have finally learned that the first order of beauty, that order is the first principle of beauty. So if you have order in your home, it is making your home beautiful. And without it, no matter how beautifully you stencil it or decorate it, if there are crumbs on the floor or dust on the baseboard, it's just not the same. So I say that as a plug for the housekeeping tasks of keeping things tidy and orderly are actually a very fundamental way in which we embrace the people that we love with the embrace of beauty. When we surround those we love with beauty, we tell them, you are good. This is not a practical matter. It's a matter of gratuity. And I will surround you with that which the world says we don't need, beauty. Keeping your house clean and orderly is a way of surrounding those you love with beauty. It also provides a sense of safety and stability, and most importantly, it allows other people to participate in the work of the household. I know from experience, if you are disorganized and you don't have a place for anything, no one can help you. When you say to the children, run downstairs, please, and go get me such and such. Where is it? Oh, I'm not sure. I'll just have to go by myself and get it by myself. Please put the scissors away. Where do they go? I don't know. I'll do it by myself. And so you can't really invite anyone into the work of the household if you don't have order in the home. It's really a wonderful thing. As an artistic and aesthetically oriented person, very tactile, I will share with you this image. Think of cleaning your home. This made a big difference for me. Think of cleaning your home as stroking your home. So I love novels in which the house is a character in the novel. Brideshead Revisited is one of the ones that comes to me most dramatically. There are novels in which the home is very, very important. Elizabeth Goudge, all of her novels, the home, the location that the drama happens in is a character in the book. It's so marvelous when you experience it. Your home is a character in your household, and it deserves your care and attention. So when we clean, think of it as a way of stroking your home the way you would hold your child and comfort it. I'm just going to make a plug for this. Get a housekeeper. That sounds completely antithetical to what I just said. But the reality is there are so many things that we are doing in the home, and it's a lie that the world tells us that you can have it all. Because right on the heels of you can have it all is you can do it all, which is why no one is there to help you anymore. In the culture that we live in, no one helps one another because you can have it all, and therefore you can do it all. You can't do it all. If you have a housekeeper come twice a month to your house and just get everything really clean, guess what? First of all, your children have an experience of what it means when you say, get it really clean, dear. If they never have an experience of really clean, they don't know what to aim for. Even if you have a housekeeper once a month, let me tell you, you're going to be doing a heck of a lot of cleaning in between, so don't worry, you have lots of opportunity to stroke your home. It just takes a tremendous amount of pressure off of you as the homemaker, because there are so many things we're responsible for now. So I'm just saying that by word of permission, and also by way of when you, as a young family, when you are deciding on your family finances, begin to start incorporating someone to help keep house as part of the family budget. It's also much nicer to clean with another woman. So I found that it's a really wonderful way to experience a broader community. Now let's go on to feeding your family. This is about nourishing the body and the heart. What I would recommend is to familiarize yourself with the nutritional quality of the food that you prepare, and learn how the body needs different nutrients to grow. This is a beautiful way of interacting with food that's different from just stuffing it in your mouth. God designed the world so there's a beautiful symbiotic relationship. There's a beautiful intertwinedness, interaction, and food is a really great way to experience that. I want to recommend that you learn to get a feel for food, which sounds weird to say, but I've discovered in learning how to prepare certain kinds of food that every ingredient that you put in food has a different way of being. It's just, each one is different, and when you begin to get a feel for it, you use it differently in your food. I have a Sicilian sister-in-law who says she never takes more than half an hour to make dinner. Amazing, like that is incredible. Her food is unbelievable. She has a feel for food. So when she throws things together in the pot, it's unbelievable because she has a feel for food. A great way to get to know food is by doing something like making sourdough or fermenting food. We tend to not interact with the food that we eat. By doing something like preparing sourdough, it's a live organism, you're actually going to be interacting. Whoa, I must have put way too much flour in that. That's not looking very good. So, and you begin to get a sense for the rhythm of the food that then begins to rise your dough. It's a great way to begin to get a sense for food, to work with something living, which is something like sourdough or fermenting. I also want to just say, when you are thinking about food, it's your way of nourishing the members of your household. Now, I'm not saying get rid of prepackaged foods. How is it that John so dramatically said it? We're not looking to purify. But if you think about it this way, prepackaged food is putting things into your family's body that you might not necessarily be choosing, right? Now, you might choose to put that ingredient, look at it, but think of the food that you purchase to give your family as this is my choice of what is going into my family's body. Read the labels. There may be things in that food that is not conducive to what you, as a loving person who is serving the people you're connected to, you would not choose to put in their bodies. So I think that's also a very important way to grow in the art of service to our family through nourishing them. Finally, serve the food with dignity, with the dignity due to something that is that's filling an essential and noble need in yourself and your family. So if you've prepared good food for your family, don't throw it at them. We use paper plates sometimes. It's just an absolute necessity. But think about that when you put food on the plate. Say, this is the final touch, how I'm telling my family I care about them. This food is ennobled by what it is giving to you, whom I love and who are noble, right? So then it begins to drive a little bit how we set the table, how we serve the food. These are small things that make a big difference. Finally, I want to talk about decorating in the home and bringing in the beautiful. This can be very overwhelming to a lot of women because, again, we're not really raised in a culture where we get a tutorial in that. We just kind of pick up what we can where we can. I had a woman who came to a Bethany weekend, a young woman who had been married for 2 or 3 years, really lovely woman, I mean, truly. And she had a question about decorating in the home, and she started crying. And she said, I'm so not an aesthetically aware person. I want to make my home beautiful for my family. I have no idea what to do. You could tell it was like suffering inside of her. So a lot of people feel that way, and I really want to say that decorating is not about something that's in a magazine. It's not something that's on Pinterest. It's about loving your family by bringing beauty into the home. Now, it's true, it's hard to do that if you yourself are not aware of beautiful things. So the first order of decorating your home, I would say, expose yourself to beautiful things. And if you don't know what beautiful things are, I would say, first of all, be more aware and alive in nature. The colors out there are extraordinary. The different shades of green, what happens in the shadows of the undergrowth, the yellow tips of the grass, how that complements. There's so much education and beauty in the natural world around us, first in color, but also shape, incredible shapes in nature. So try to be more aware of the world that you live in, and it will begin to form your palate or your taste for that which is beautiful. And then you will find yourself reaching for those things without realizing it. And then someone says, "Wow, your home is lovely." And you think, how did that happen? You're just bringing what you saw into your home. Expose yourself to poetry and beautiful music. We love folk music in our house, but folk music is a little bit like dessert. Really beautiful music is the food that nourishes and grows your soul. So exposing yourself to lovely classical music. We have a playlist on the LifeCraft, challenge, that we put together a playlist of classical music that is more easily accessible to people who are not used to listening to classical music. Some classical music is very not accessible to someone who's not used to it. And there's other music that paints images much more freely. So if you want to avail yourself of that at the LifeCraft website, it's great if you are listening to beautiful words in poetry or reading beautiful words in poetry and listening to beautiful music, you will start reaching for the beautiful without realizing it. Check out books from the library of great artists, visual artists, graphic artists. They're filled with beautiful color and wonderful proportions. Mostly don't be afraid. Bring in what you love. Learn to love beautiful things by feeding on them yourself, and then bring in what you love, okay? Design within your means. The problem with interior decorating, this is the problem with Interior Decorating magazine. It creates an appetite for having to have that thing. And most of us can't afford that thing. It's not a commodity of the rich. Beauty is not a commodity of the rich, nor is it limited to a particular style. Okay, so in checking out books from the library, magazines, etc., be very careful that you don't substitute their suggestion for a requirement. There are many cheap ways of decorating, cutting out a beautiful picture from a magazine and hanging it on your fridge, saving a postcard of some beautiful piece of artwork, copying a poem and putting it somewhere on the wall of your house, a beautiful quote, scripture, or just bringing a flower into the home. Or if you don't have flowers, it's amazing how gorgeous a ripening stalk of grass is. So there are many ways that we can decorate our home in a cheap way, in a way that's affordable to us. And then lastly, this is a very important part of decorating in the home. This is why we decorate in the home. You want to teach your children to respect and revere beauty. So part of that is instilling in your children a sense of care for the beauty that you bring into the home. Whether it's a piece of furniture, that piece of furniture we don't jump on. We had an old horrible couch, was the flip couch. That was the one everybody could do flips on. The other couches you can't do flips on. And you begin to teach your children certain habits and rules of courtesy and respect for the belongings in the home, people's individual belongings. And by making it beautiful, you give them a reason. It becomes more ostensibly understandable to the child. There's dignity here, and so we respect and revere its dignity. I have prepared for you a handout of just my favorite tools for the home. I'm not going to go over them in any kind of great extent. Do please look at them, because actually if there's something in there that you would like clarification on or to ask, it's a great time to ask that after lunch. We're going to have an extended question and answer period. I hope that they're helpful for you. I certainly welcome any discussion in that regard. And we're going to go ahead and stop here for lunch, because lunch is right here. We're going to be grateful for the preparation of the food, carefully prepared for us. So we were very grateful this time around that we could have the food catered by a local family-owned catering company that prepares the food themselves and not a larger chain. So we're very grateful for that, and we're delighted and looking forward to the time that we will have together over food to continue to discuss these things.
Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.